Hey there, hope you're having a wonderful day. In this video, we're going to be coding a calculator using just plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the design will be based on the iPhone calculator. So we have the exact buttons and the layout will be the same as the iPhone calculator. So for instance, I can do 124.75 times 54.32 and I click equal and you can see we get the results over here. I can make it negative or positive. And I can get the percentage, so dividing by 100. And yeah, and then I can auto clear. So there are a lot of calculator tutorials out there, but the thing that they all do is they use the eval function to calculate the equations, and that is not a good way to create a calculator. With the eval function, you are running a string as if it were code, and this would be a security risk, so it's not recommended to use the eval function. We're going to be writing out the code to do the calculations ourselves for each button, so that it can help you develop your programming skills with logical thinking. Alright, very quickly, before we begin coding, I just want to mention that I am working on this website project tutorial series using just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So currently I have the interest rate calculator on my YouTube channel, and this one is the calculator. And the next two videos will be a password generator and creating a flashcards study website. And you can find all these tutorials on my YouTube channel, as well as on KennyYipCoding.com. And if you want to stay up to date for more tutorials, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Alright, so let's begin coding. So I have three files, index.html, style.css, and calculator.js. So in the calculator JavaScript file, we have all the symbols that we'll be adding. So all of these symbols are in an array, and we're going to filter out for the symbols on the right and symbols on top. So these are the operators and equal sign, which will go on the right side of the calculator. And on the top, we have these three buttons for clearing, positive or negative, and percentage. And for our index.html, I've added a title for the page, so calculator, and I've linked the style sheet and the script tag for the calculator JavaScript file. So for the HTML file, we're just going to add a few tags. So div ID, calculator, and here I'm going to add an input. Type is going to be text. ID will be display, and I'm going to make it read only. So this is going to be used for the calculator display, and when the user presses a number button or performs any operations, we're going to update that same display. And then we're going to add a div tag for the buttons. So div ID is equal to buttons, and that's all we need for our HTML. So for the individual buttons, we're going to use JavaScript to populate the button tags inside this div tag. Alright, so let's just double click on the index.html file, and you can see we have one input box here, and that is for the display. Alright, now let's add some buttons. Alright, so I'm going to iterate through this array of symbols, and I'm going to create a button tag for each symbol. So for let I is equal to 0, I is less than button values dot length I++, let value equal to button values of index I, and then now let's create a button tag. So let button equal to document dot create element button, and then let's place the text onto the button. So button dot inner text is equal to value. So what we just did was we created a button tag, and this line over here takes the symbol and places it inside this button tag. So we have AC for the first value, and then we have positive, negative, percentage, and so on. So once we've created the button tag, we need to add it to our buttons div. So we need to add all the button tags inside this div. And we can access this div tag using the ID buttons. So here I'm going to do document.getElement by ID buttons dot append child button. Okay, so we've created all the buttons and assigned them the values of each symbol, and then we add all the buttons to this buttons div tag. Alright, so now if I refresh the page, you can see we have all our buttons over here. And for all the button symbols, I'll copy and paste this into the video description, so you can copy and paste it from there, and you can also get the completed code in the GitHub link in the video description. Alright, so now we have our buttons. Let's style them up. So the first thing I want to do is organize the buttons inside a grid so that there are 4 columns. So I'm going to do buttons, and I'm going to make it display grid. Grid template columns is going to be repeat 4, so 4 columns and 1 fractional unit. And then we'll have a gap of 8 pixels, and we'll add some padding of 8 pixels. Alright, now let's refresh the page, and you can see we've organized the buttons inside a grid, so there are 4 columns, and we've added some padding and gaps between each button. Alright, now let's add some styling for each button. So here I'm going to do buttons, button, so I'm getting the ID buttons, and for each button tag inside this div tag, I'm going to apply the same styling. So background color is going to be 505050, and the color will be white, so this is the font color. Font size will be 36 pixels. And we want to align the text at the center of the button, so I'm going to do text align center. Alright, let's see what we have so far. And if I refresh, you can see all the buttons are gray and the font color is white. And we've aligned the text at the center of each button, and the font size is 36 pixels. So let's adjust the width and height of each button, and let's make them round. So for the width, I'm going to make it 80 pixels. Height is going to be 80 pixels. And then border radius, this is going to round out the edges of the button. So I'm going to make it 40 pixels so that it's a full circle. And then border, I'm going to set it to none. So we don't want any outline of our button. Alright, now let's refresh the page, and you can see each button is now a circle. Now I want all these buttons to fit within a div tag, and that div tag is the calculator div. So this div tag with the ID calculator, I'm going to add some styling to it so I can limit the width and height and add some coloring as well. So up here I'm going to do calculator. Let's change the font, so font family is going to be Arial, and let's add a background color of 1C. 1C, 1C, so this is a dark gray, and a width of 400 pixels, and a max width of 400 pixels. Alright, now let's refresh the page. And as you can see, we have all the buttons inside the div tag with the ID calculator, and the width limit is 400 pixels. So it's going to push all the buttons together and reduce the spacing in between. Now let's add a bit more styling. So some of these buttons don't have the same colors. So on the right, they should be an orange color, and on the top, they should be a lighter gray. So here you can see I filtered out the right symbols and top symbols. So here I'm going to make a check to see if the current value is within the right symbols array or top symbols array. If so, we're going to assign a specific color. So if right symbols dot includes value button.style.background color, and this is going to be an orange color, so hash ff9500. And let's do the same for the symbols on top. So else if top symbols dot includes value button.style.background color, and this is going to be a lighter gray, so hash d4 d4 d2. And because it's a lighter gray, we want the font color to be darker. So button.style.color is equal to hash 1c 1c 1c. So now if I refresh the page, you can see we've added the orange colors to the operator buttons, and these 3 special buttons over here, we've made them a lighter gray color. Now, one more thing to add is the 0 should take up 2 columns. So let's go ahead and fix that. So up here, I'm going to do if value is equal to 0, then I'm going to do button.style.width, and it should be twice as big as a regular button. So here you can see the width is 80 pixels for a single button. So I'm going to make it 160 pixels. And then we need to adjust it in the grid column. So I'm going to do button.style.grid column, and I'll set it to span 2. So this means that this button is going to take up 2 columns. Alright, now let's refresh the page. And you can see the button is over here. And actually, let's make it slightly bigger. So I'm going to change this to 200 pixels. So it's going to be slightly bigger than twice the size of a regular button. And the reason is we need to account for the spacing in between each button. So now if I refresh the page, the button gets a little bit bigger. Alright, so now we have all the buttons, and I want to add some additional styling so that when the user hovers over the buttons or clicks on them, the color will change slightly. Alright, so back in our CSS file, I'm going to add some actions. So buttons, button, colon, on hover. So if we hover over the button with the mouse, I'm going to change the opacity to be 70%. And I'll do the same for button active. So basically, when you click on the button, I'll make the opacity 90%. Alright, now let's refresh the page. And if I hover over it, you can see the opacity changes to 70%. And if I click on it, it becomes 90%. Alright, so now we have all the buttons. Let's add some styling for the display. So over here, I'm going to do display. So the background color is going to be the same as the calculator. And the font color is going to be white. And we want the text to start on the right side, so I'm going to do text align right. And let's make the font size 90 pixels. Alright, so let's see what we have so far. So this is the input box. So now if I refresh the page, you can see the font is going to be 90 pixels and the background color is the same as the calculator. Now there's some few issues here, and that is there is a border. So you can see there's this white border, so let's get rid of that. And let's make it so that the width is 100% of the calculator width. So right now it's sticking past the calculator boundaries, so let's make it stay within the container. So first, let's do border, none, and then outline, none. And the width is going to be 100% of its parent container, so it's going to be 400 pixels. Alright, so now if I refresh the page, you can see it's basically 400 pixels, but it's sticking out a bit, and that is due to some padding. So let's fix that. And to fix that, I'll just do box sizing border box. Alright, now if I refresh the page, you can see it's now within the container. And for the calculator, let's add some padding. So padding. So the order is top, right, bottom, left. So from the top, we want to do 60 pixels, then 5 pixels on the right, 0 pixels for the bottom, and 5 pixels for the left. Alright, now if I refresh the page, you can see we've added 60 pixels from the top and 5 pixels on the left and right side. Alright, lastly, I want to center the calculator, so for the body tag, we'll do display flex, justify content center, and align items center. Alright, now if I refresh the page, you can see the calculator is at the center of the page. Alright, so we have the UI down. Now we just need to add some functionalities for the buttons. Alright, so the idea for the calculator is we have an operator and we have two operands, so A and B. So what happens is when we press a bunch of numbers, we just add it to the display. When we click the operators button, such as addition or multiplication, we have to save the value of the current number in the display. So that value would be A, and we'll save the operator as well, and then we'll add another number, and then after that, we hit equal. So I'm going to do let A is equal to 0. So I'm just going to make A 0 by default, and let operator is equal to null, and B is equal to null. So we're going to allow the user to punch in a bunch of numbers, and the moment they click on an operator, we're going to assign that number to A and the operator to whichever button they clicked on, and then they can add a different number, which would then be assigned to B. And then when the user clicks equal, that's when we process the calculations. So over here, I'm just going to get the display element, document.getElement by ID, display. And then down here, I'm going to add an event listener for each button. So I'm going to do button.add event listener. We're going to listen for a click. And if we hear a click, we're going to call a function. Essentially, we have three groups of buttons. So the first group is going to be the symbols on the right. So this is all the operators and the equal symbol. And within this group, we can actually split it. So we have operators and equal. And then the second group is going to be these modifiers for the display. So clearing it, making it positive or negative, or dividing it by 100. So this is going to be the top symbols. And then finally, we have all the digits from 0 to 9 and the decimal. So here I'm going to add if conditional statements and group them based on the type of button. So if right symbols dot includes value, we're going to process the button. Else if top symbols dot includes value, and then else. So this else is going to be for the numbers or decimal place. So let's start with the numbers since this is the easiest one to do. As I mentioned earlier, we can split this group into two separate groups. So this is numbers or the decimal button. So I'm going to do if value is equal to the dot, so for decimal, else we get numbers. So I'm going to ignore the dot for now, and I'll just do display.value plus equal value. So we're going to add this button value, which is a number, onto the display. All right, so if I refresh the page and I press 1, you can see we get 1, 2, 3, and then I can add different numbers. So our display is adding the digits, and there's one problem, and that is the number 0. So this one is an edge case. If I refresh the page, I can actually add a bunch of zeros first, like so. And this is a waste of space because these 4 zeros do nothing. So let's make a check to see if the display value is currently equal to 0. So here I'm going to add another if conditional statement. So else if display.value is equal to 0, then we're going to replace that value. So if it's just a single 0, I'm going to do display.value equal to value. Alright, so now if I have a 0 and I press a 2 button, you can see it changes the 0 to a 2. And if I add 0 again, we get 20. Okay, and if I refresh and I put 0, if I press 0 again, nothing happens because we're just replacing this 0 with another 0. Okay? Alright, now let's add the decimal place. So over here, I'm going to make a check if display.value is not equal to empty because we only want to add the decimal place if the number exists. So if it's empty, we're just adding a period for nothing, and not display.value.includes value. So what does this mean here? Display.value is what we're seeing on the input display, and the current value is a decimal place, so it's the dot. So this is checking to make sure that the display does not already contain the dot. If so, we're going to prevent the user from adding more dots. So you don't want something like 5.5. Instead, you just want 5.5. So that's what this second check does. Okay, so if that is the case, then we'll do display.value plus equal value. So we can only add a decimal place if we have a number and the number does not already have a decimal place. Alright, so now if I press on the decimal button, nothing happens. But if I add 36, then I press the button, you can see we get 36.45. And I can't press this again because we already have a decimal place. Now the next thing I want to work on are the top symbols. For the top symbols, we have 3 options. So if value is equal to AC, else if value is equal to the plus/minus, so this is positive or negative, and then else if value is equal to the percentage. So I think the percentage is the easiest because you're just dividing by 100. So here I'm going to do display.value is equal to number of display.value divided by 100. So when we get the value, it would be a string, so I'm converting it to a number and then dividing it by 100 and then assigning it back to value. Alright, so now if I do 150 and I take the percentage of that, we get 1.5. And if I click on the percent button again, we get 0.015. Let's try again. Take the percentage of this, we get 85.42. And there you go. And you might be wondering why we have all these numbers. Why is there a 1 at the end of the decimal place? And the reason is because of how numbers are stored. So numbers are stored as bits. And when you get a number that's less than 1, so a floating point number, it becomes more difficult to make the number accurate using the bits. Therefore, we get this 0.00001 over here. Okay? So that's just how computers store numbers. But yeah, now let's make this positive and negative button work. So with the positive and negative button, we have some edge cases. The first one is if the screen is empty, there's nothing there, we can't add a negative sign. And the second one is if there is something there and that something is 0. So you can't have a negative symbol in front of 0. So here I'm going to make a check. If display.value is not equal to empty and display.value is not equal to 0, then we can add the negative sign. And in this case, it depends on whether we have the negative sign active or not. If I have -5 and I want to make it negative, well, it's already negative, so it shouldn't be -5. So it should be toggling back and forth between positive and negative. So here I'm going to make a check if display.value at index 0, so the first character in the display, if it's equal to negative, we're going to remove the negative symbol to make it positive. So here I'm going to do display.value is equal to display.value.slice1. So we're just taking the current display value and taking the substring, so we're excluding the first element, which is at index 0. So we're starting from index 1 of that string. And then else, this means that it's a positive number. We're going to do display.value is equal to the negative sign plus display.value. Alright, so let's do 542. If I click on this button, it will be negative, and if I click it again, we get positive. So we can toggle back and forth. And if it's empty and I click on this, nothing happens. And if I have a 0 and I click on this, nothing happens. So it needs to be a non-zero number. Now for the final button, we have the clear button. So this should get rid of everything on the screen. So for this, I'm going to add a clear all function. So basically, clear all is going to reset these three values. So function clear all. And I'm just going to do A is equal to 0, operator is equal to null, and B is equal to null. So this function is just going to reset these three variables to their starting state. So let's say I've pressed 500 and I press multiply. We have two values saved, so we need to clear those values. And then after we clear the variables, I'm going to update the display and set the value to an empty string. Alright, so now if I do 125, plus minus, doesn't matter, and I press this clear button, it's going to get rid of the text on the display. Alright, so we have these three top buttons done. Now let's work on the operators and this equal symbol. So here we can divide the group into two. So we have the equal symbol or the operators. So I can do if value is equal to equal, else, this means that the value is an operator. So here I'll do operator is equal to the value. So if it's multiply, we'll assign operator the multiplication symbol. And if it's division, we'll assign it a division symbol. So we're saving the operator. And then we'll do A is equal to display dot value. So when we press on an operator symbol, we need to save the current display value and then clear it for the next value. So we need to clear it for the value B. So I'm going to do display.value and set it to an empty string. Alright, so now let's do 50 and I can do times. And you can see we've saved two variables, 50 for A and multiplication for operator. Now it's empty and I can do 60. So this will be 50 times 60. And then we need to press on the equal button. In this case, it does nothing. So let's process the operators with the equal button. So when the user presses on the equal button, we expect there to be an A value and an operator. So if there's no A value, that means that the user is just pressing equal without creating an equation. So we're going to prevent that. So if A is not equal to null, so only when we have an A value will we process the equation. In this case, I don't need to check to see if the operator exists because we only assign it over here. So we assign the operator along with the A value. So I just need to check one of them. So if A is not null, then we can continue with the equation. So B is going to be the current display dot value. And then as I mentioned before, these are strings. So we need to convert them to numbers. So let num A equal to number of A, and let num B equal to number of B. And now we need to check which operator we pressed on. So if operator is equal to, and the first one is the division symbol. So if we have division, we'll do display.value equal to num A divided by num B. Else, if operator is equal to, the next one is multiplication. And then here I'm going to do display.value equal to num A times num B. Then we have minus and plus, so else if operator is equal to minus display.value is equal to num_a minus num_b. And then finally, if operator is equal to plus display.value will be num_a plus num_b. And then after we've done the calculations and displayed the results, we need to reset the values we stored in A operator and B. So I'm going to do clear all. Alright, so now if I do 1500 plus 20, we get 1520, and I can divide it by 10. We can minus 600, and we get a negative number. And we can take the percentage of that. We get 4.48. Let's make it positive again. Let's multiply it by 9, and then minus 500, and plus 25, plus 500, and then auto clear. Okay, all right, so it looks like our calculator is working. Now, one thing that we didn't take care of is division by 0. So what happens if I do 100 divided by 0? And you can see it says infinity. In other programming languages, you would get an error. Fortunately, JavaScript doesn't give us an error, so it just handles that and gives us infinity. But yeah, that's it for this tutorial. We have a functional calculator, and you can continue working on this if you want. You can add more buttons. You can add some scientific calculations into this calculator. You can style it any way you like. It's all up to you. And I definitely encourage you to continue working on this project. But yeah, so that's it for this tutorial. And if you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you give this video a like. And if you have any questions, let me know down below in the comments. And if you want to stay up to date for more tutorials like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.